I am 24 years old, and I was reorganizing the hardware section when the door chime rang. I glanced up to see a man I had never encountered standing near the entrance, scanning the room with the uncertain expression people wear when they find themselves somewhere unfamiliar. He clutched a leather briefcase in one hand and adjusted his glasses with the other. The new doctor for Blackwater Medical Clinic. I had been told he would arrive this week, but this was my first time seeing him face to face. He wore pressed slacks and a button-down shirt, professional attire for someone who would be examining patients all day. Marcus caught my attention from behind the cash register and gestured toward him. "Ethan, can you assist the gentleman? I need to balance these receipts." I placed down the box of nails I had been sorting and approached him. "Hello there. Can I help you locate something?" He appeared relieved. "Yes, thank you. I am Dr. Nathan Pierce, the new physician at the clinic. They provided me this list of supplies for my home office, but I am unfamiliar with where to find most of these items." He extended the paper to me. "Nice to meet you, Dr. Pierce. I am Ethan Monroe. Let me guide you through the store." I led him down the aisles, collecting items from his list, filing supplies, first aid materials, basic tools, and other home essentials. He followed closely, asking questions about the store arrangement. "How long have you been employed here?" he asked as I reached upward to retrieve a package of batteries from an upper shelf. "About 7 years now. My mother worked here when she was my age as well. Monroe General Store is something of a family legacy." He smiled. "That is wonderful. I appreciate towns with history. That was my opportunity." As we walked toward the checkout area, I cleared my throat. "Speaking of history, there are some things about Blackwater you ought to know." "Oh?" He looked curious rather than dismissive, which was an encouraging sign. "Yes, we have these 5 rules everyone observes. They may sound unusual, but they are crucial." I began scanning his items while I spoke. Rule 1. Never enter the fog when it rolls in at night, not even briefly. Dr. Pierce nodded, absorbing this carefully. "Is it due to dangerous animals?" "Something along those lines," I said, not wishing to alarm him with excessive detail too quickly. Rule 2. If you encounter a child alone on the road after midnight, drive past without stopping. A child alone on the road? Like someone who ran away? Precisely. They appear that way, but you must keep driving. Rule 3 was next. What is Rule 3? If a stranger offers you something for free, particularly food or drink, decline it politely and leave immediately. Dr. Pierce raised his eyebrows. That seems oddly specific. Trust me, you will recognize it when you experience it. Rule 4, I continued. If you hear knocking on your door in sets of 3 after 2 a.m., do not answer, no matter who claims to be outside. He was studying my face carefully now, attempting to determine if I was serious. I was, and Rule 5, I concluded. If you see your own reflection behaving differently than you are, leave that location at once and find another person. Dr. Pierce was silent for a moment. These do not sound like standard safety measures. They are not, I admitted, but they keep people protected here. What caught me off guard was what occurred next. Instead of dismissing the rules or changing the topic like most newcomers did, Dr. Pierce leaned closer. "Where did these rules originate? How long have they been in place?" I paused while placing his supplies into bags. Most people simply nodded politely or ignored the subject. They extend back generations. My grandmother taught them to my mother, who taught them to me. Have you witnessed what occurs when people violate them? I nodded gradually. Yes, every single one of them. Enough to understand they are genuine. He did not retreat or laugh. Instead, he asked more questions, thoughtful ones about the town's history, whether the rules were identical in surrounding areas, if they evolved over time. I found myself sharing more than I typically did with newcomers. When I finished processing his purchases, I found myself saying, "If you require anything else for the clinic, I can deliver it to you. Save you a journey. That is genuinely kind of you, Ethan. I may accept that offer." I carried his bags to the entrance. As he departed, I observed through the window as he walked down the sidewalk. When he reached the intersection where the sidewalk passed near the edge of the marshland, he deliberately crossed to the opposite side of the street, maintaining distance from the water's edge even though it was the middle of the afternoon. "He seems decent," Marcus said, appearing behind me. "Yes," I agreed. Still watching Dr. Pierce through the window, "Intelligent as well," Marcus added with a knowing expression. I disregarded that remark. He actually paid attention to the rules. Most newcomers do not. Let us hope he continues paying attention, Marcus said, his tone becoming somber. Remember what happened to the previous doctor? I nodded. The prior physician at Blackwater Medical Clinic had lasted less than 6 weeks before breaking Rule 4. She had departed town the following morning, trembling and refusing to explain to anyone what she had heard or seen. I should monitor him in a few days, I said. Make certain he is still treating the rules seriously. Excellent idea. As I returned to organizing shelves, I thought about Derek Walsh, the insurance salesman who had visited town last spring. He had laughed when I told him the rules, called us backward rural people directly to my face. 5 days later, they discovered him beside the marshland with strange circular burns covering his arms. The official report stated chemical accident, but everyone in town knew otherwise. The telephone's sharp ring interrupted the peaceful evening. I had just completed cleaning up after dinner and was preparing to read when the sound startled me. Late calls in Blackwater typically meant difficulty. Hello? I answered, hearing nothing except unsteady breathing on the opposite end for several seconds. Ethan. Dr. Pierce's voice finally emerged, shaking and thin. Something is incorrect. My front door. It will not stay closed. My grip on the receiver tightened. What do you mean it will not stay closed? I secured it with the deadbolt, but it keeps swinging open on its own. The lock is functioning properly. I can see the mechanism engaging, but the door simply opens anyway. Her words rushed out faster now. I attempted barricading it with a chair, but the chair slides away. I am watching it happen, Ethan. Do not move. Stay distant from windows. I will be there immediately. I hung up and hurried to my father's room, knocking once before entering. Dad was still awake, reviewing paperwork with his reading glasses balanced on his nose. It is Dr. Pierce, I said. His door keeps opening on its own. Dad's expression changed instantly. He swung his legs off the bed and reached for his boots. The boundary is testing him. We should go. We took Dad's truck, driving faster than was properly safe on Blackwater's dim streets. Neither of us spoke. We both understood what this signified. Newcomers occasionally faced these tests, particularly those who became close to families like ours who comprehended the town's true character. Dr. Pierce lived in a modest house near the medical clinic. Every light was illuminated when we arrived, blazing from each window like a lighthouse. I reached his front door in 3 quick strides and knocked. Dr. Pierce, it is Ethan and my father. The door opened just enough for him to look out before he pulled it wider. Dr. Pierce stood there in jeans and a sweater, his face pale and strained. He had been weeping. Thank you for coming, he whispered, stepping back to allow us inside. I realize it sounds insane, but it is not insane, I assured him, following him inside. Not in Blackwater. The living room was bright with every lamp activated. All the curtains were drawn firmly, and Dr. Pierce had even positioned a blanket over the window in the front door. He had collected cushions and blankets on the sofa, creating a small protected area in the center of the room. I have been sitting here since I telephoned, he said, embracing himself. I did not know what else to do. Dad moved to one of the covered windows and cautiously pulled back the edge of the curtain just enough to look outside. His body became rigid. Thomas, I asked. He released the curtain to fall back into position. There is something outside, fog moving in patterns it should not. Dr. Pierce made a small, frightened sound. What does it signify? Dad turned to face us, his expression serious but calm. It signifies the boundary is testing you, Dr. Pierce. Blackwater sits on what my father called a threshold place, where our world intersects with something else. New people who learn our rules and begin to comprehend sometimes receive attention. Attention from what? Dr. Pierce asked. Better not to name it, Dad replied. But we will remain with you tonight. By morning, this should conclude. I moved to Dr. Pierce's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. We will not abandon you alone. He nodded gratefully, some of the tension departing his body. We arranged ourselves for a long night. Dad took the armchair near the front window, periodically checking outside. I sat beside Dr. Pierce on the sofa. None of us felt like sleeping. Would you like to check the door again? I asked after an hour had elapsed. Dr. Pierce shook his head. Not yet. I am afraid of what I may discover. Around midnight, we heard scratching at the back entrance. Not like an animal attempting to enter, more calculated, almost like fingernails dragging slowly across the wood. Dad and I exchanged looks. Dr. Pierce pulled his knees to his chest. "Do not open it," Dad said unnecessarily. "Do not even acknowledge it." The scratching persisted for nearly 15 minutes before stopping suddenly. At 3 o'clock, the lights flickered twice but remained on. Dr. Pierce reached for my hand and held it firmly. "Tell me something ordinary," he whispered. "Something that has nothing to do with any of this." I thought for a moment. When I was 8, I decided the store needed a dog to greet customers. I found a stray puppy and concealed it in the storage area for 4 days. Before Marcus discovered it had chewed through an entire box of gardening gloves. Dr. Pierce's laugh was small, but genuine. "Did you get to keep it?" "No, but Mr. Henderson across the street adopted him, named him Chewer." We exchanged stories through the night, keeping our voices low. Dad remained alert, checking windows periodically and reporting that the fog still moved in patterns that did not match any natural wind. Finally, the first gray light of dawn filtered through the edges of the curtains. Dad stood and stretched. "Sunrise," he said. "Dr. Pierce, would you like to check now?" Dr. Pierce hesitated, then nodded. I walked with him to the front entrance, waiting outside as he tested it. "Ethan," he called after a moment, his voice lifting with relief. "It is working correctly." When he emerged, color had returned to his face. "It closes and locks normally again." Dad was already in the kitchen when we returned. "The fog is gone as well," he reported. "You survived it, Dr. Pierce. What occurs now?" he asked. "Now we eat breakfast," Dad said practically. "Do you have eggs?" While Dad cooked, Dr. Pierce sat at his small kitchen table, looking exhausted but relieved. I made coffee, moving around his kitchen with growing ease. "I should tell you something," Dr. Pierce said quietly as I set a mug in front of him. "Last week I almost violated Rule 2. I paused. "The child on the road?" He nodded. "I was driving home late from the clinic and saw a boy standing beside the highway. He appeared maybe 6 years old. I started slowing down. I do not even know why. Then I remembered what you told me and accelerated past. He watched my vehicle as I drove away, and his face. It was not right, Ethan. The expression was not human." "You did the correct thing," I said, feeling a wave of protectiveness. "The rules matter, Dr. Pierce. They keep people safe." "I understand that now," he said, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "I truly understand." Dad set plates of scrambled eggs in front of us. The Monroe family, Ethan's mother's side. They have been maintaining these rules alive for generations. My father-in-law ensured I comprehended them when I married into the family. "I want to learn more," Dr. Pierce said, "about the town, the rules. All of it. I will teach you," I promised, "everything I know." After breakfast, with sunlight now streaming through the windows, the night's events felt almost dreamlike, but the serious look in my father's eyes reminded me it had been very real. We helped Dr. Pierce tidy up, and I made certain he felt safe remaining in the house alone. "Call if anything else occurs," I told him. "Anything at all, I will," he said, looking steadier now. "Thank you both for coming." Outside, as we walked toward Dad's truck, I spotted someone watching us from across the street. Helen Crane stood on the sidewalk, smiling widely. When she saw me notice her, her smile widened even further, too wide, too eager, and she waved with exaggerated enthusiasm. Rule 3 flashed in my mind. If a stranger offers you something for free, decline and leave. But this was Rule 3's companion warning. Avoid people who seem unnaturally friendly. I grabbed Dad's arm and guided him toward the truck. "We should leave now. What is it?" Dad asked, then followed my gaze. His expression hardened. "Get in the truck, Ethan." Crane kept waving, her smile fixed and unnatural as we pulled away from the curb. I contacted Sheriff Martinez, my hand still shaking slightly. I had just finished telling her everything about Helen Crane. The way she smiled too wide, how she waved with that unnatural enthusiasm, and most importantly, how she perfectly matched the description of someone to avoid according to our warnings. "I know it sounds strange," I said before disconnecting, "but in Blackwater, these things matter." Sheriff Martinez had listened carefully, taking notes without judgment. She promised to investigate Crane's background, though I could tell she was being professional rather than truly believing my concerns about the rules. 4 days later, my telephone rang while I was restocking the plumbing supplies at Monroe General Store. "Ethan, Sheriff Martinez here. You were correct about Crane." I stepped away from the display, lowering my voice even though no customers were nearby. "Correct how?" "Her real name is Margaret Sutton. She is wanted in 5 counties across Montana and Wyoming for running fraud schemes on elderly residents. Apparently, she relocates to small towns, becomes friendly with vulnerable seniors, and then empties their bank accounts. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the store's air conditioning. Has she harmed anyone here? Not yet. We arrested her this morning. Found false identification, credit card devices, and documentation on at least 6 of our older residents. You may have saved Mr. Patterson from losing his retirement savings. After disconnecting, I leaned against the counter, relief washing over me. The rules had protected us again. This time it was not anything supernatural, just a regular criminal, but our warnings had still kept us safe. Marcus noticed my expression and raised an eyebrow. That fraud artist Crane, or Sutton actually, Sheriff Martinez just arrested her. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. The rules do not distinguish between human predators and the other kind. They just keep us safe. I spent the rest of my shift feeling validated. The other employees had noticed Crane's excessive friendliness as well. But I was the one who took it seriously enough to contact the sheriff. Perhaps I really was growing into my role as a guardian of Blackwater's traditions. My satisfaction lasted precisely 3 hours and 40 minutes. I was helping a customer locate canning jars when my telephone vibrated. Dr. Pierce's name flashed on the screen and something in my gut tightened. Ethan. His voice was barely above a whisper. There is fog near the clinic parking lot. I am observing Rule 1, but some of my patients are becoming concerned. How long do I need to remain inside? My heart jumped to my throat. Do not move. I am coming. I quickly explained the situation to Marcus, who immediately waved me out the door. Go. Fog does not appear during daylight by accident. I drove to the medical clinic faster than was properly legal, parking haphazardly in the emergency zone. The parking lot was visible from the street, a flat expanse of asphalt bordered by the beginning of the marshland that surrounded most of Blackwater. Dr. Pierce stood at the clinic entrance, his body completely rigid. About 30 feet away, a thick bank of fog sat motionless on the ground between the parking lot and the marsh. The fog was not the normal gray-white of morning mist, but a dense, luminous white that seemed to glow even in the afternoon sunlight. I approached slowly, careful not to make sudden movements or sounds. When I reached Dr. Pierce, I whispered, "Where are the patients?" Inside, he breathed back, barely moving his lips. I told the nurse to keep them in the waiting room with magazines. Smart man. I stood beside him, adopting the same frozen posture, and we watched the fog together. It was thicker than normal fog, its edges seeming to pulse with an inner light that caught the sun in unusual ways. How long has it been here? I asked, my voice barely audible. About 15 minutes before I contacted you. We remained there, completely motionless, for what felt like forever. My back began to ache. My legs grew stiff, but I did not dare move. The fog occasionally shifted, its edges seeming almost alive before settling back into its peculiar stillness. Nearly 2 hours passed before the fog finally began to dissipate. It did not blow away or fade gradually. Instead, it simply withdrew, pulling back toward the marshland and vanishing among the reeds. Dr. Pierce let out a long breath and leaned against me. My legs are aching. I put an arm around his shoulders. You did exactly correct. That is not normal fog. I gathered that, he said, rubbing his calves. What would have occurred if I had moved? I do not know specifically, I admitted, but nothing beneficial. That evening, I took Dr. Pierce to meet Constance Harper, one of our town elders who knew more about Blackwater's history and rules than anyone else alive. Constance lived in a small house near the town square, its walls lined with books and unusual artifacts collected over her 82 years. Fog at the clinic, Constance said, pouring tea for us. That is significant. It is observing. Testing what? Dr. Pierce asked. You, Constance said simply. Newcomers who learn the rules sometimes attract attention. I leaned forward. Dr. Pierce followed Rule 1 perfectly. He did not move until the fog departed. Constance nodded approvingly. Good. Your cousin Daniel was not so wise. This was news to me. Cousin Daniel encountered fog? 18 years ago, he was fishing at dawn, saw fog rolling in, and decided to pack up his gear instead of staying still. Constance shook her head. He ventured 3 steps into it. What happened to him? Dr. Pierce asked. Constance sipped her tea. First, his boat motor died on the way home. Then his house flooded from a burst pipe. Not enough to destroy it, just enough to make it unlivable for months. His cat disappeared. He lost his position when the factory downsized unexpectedly. Finally, he collapsed and broke his ankle in 2 places while cleaning his gutters. I remembered some of this, but I had been only 12 when Cousin Daniel left town. I had not connected it to the rules. After the ankle, he departed Blackwater, Constance continued. Said the town was cursed. I attempted to explain he had brought it on himself by entering the fog, but he would not listen. We thanked Constance for the information and departed as darkness fell. I suggested dinner at the restaurant and Dr. Pierce agreed. The meal was comfortable, both of us processing what we had learned from Constance. It was fully dark when we left the restaurant. The walk to Dr. Pierce's house was not long, just 5 blocks through the center of town before reaching the residential area near the clinic. The night was clear, stars visible above the streetlights, and the air had that late summer warmth that made walking pleasant. We were passing the space between the pharmacy and the old courthouse building when I heard it. Ethan. I froze mid-step. The voice had come from the darkness between the buildings, a voice I recognized instantly despite not having heard it in 12 years. Ethan, I need your help. It was my mother Sarah's voice. Exactly as I remembered it, the slight softness, the particular way she pronounced my name with emphasis on the second syllable. But my mother had been dead for 12 years, Ethan, please. I am hurt. Dr. Pierce's hand clamped around my arm, his fingers digging in. Rule 5, he whispered urgently. Do not answer. The voice came again, more insistent. Ethan, I know you can hear me. Why will you not help me? Every instinct in my body screamed to respond, to help the voice that sounded exactly like my mother. My mouth opened, words forming on my tongue. Dr. Pierce's grip tightened painfully. It is not her, he hissed. Remember Rule 5. We started walking again, faster now, away from the voice, but it followed us, seeming to move from shadow to shadow along our route. Ethan, why are you ignoring me? The voice grew angry, the familiar tones of my mother twisting into something else, something with an edge that made my skin crawl. Ethan, answer me. Dr. Pierce pulled me along, practically running now. I felt a pressure building in my head, an overwhelming compulsion to turn around to answer the voice to help my mother. The urge was almost physical, like hands pushing against my back. Almost to my house, Dr. Pierce panted. Do not look back. Do not answer. The voice continued calling, each repetition of my name more distorted and angry than the last. Without Dr. Pierce's presence, I am not certain I could have resisted the urge to respond. My name followed me everywhere. For 5 straight nights, it floated through the darkness, calling with Mother Sarah's voice. I heard it from the marshland behind Monroe General Store, from the alley beside the courthouse, even from the empty field across from my house. Ethan, it would whisper, sounding exactly like her. Ethan, I need you. Each time I walked faster, clenching my jaw against the urge to answer. My skin crawled with the knowledge that something was watching me, waiting for me to break Rule 5. On the 5th night, I barely slept. I lay awake listening for my name, jumping at every creak of the old house. When morning finally came, I stumbled into the kitchen to find Dad already at the table, dark circles under his eyes. You heard it again last night, he said. Not a question. I nodded, pouring coffee into the largest mug we owned. 5 nights consecutively now. Always sounds like Mother. Dad stared into his own cup. When I was about your age, I went through the same thing. For me, it was my sister's voice. She died when we were children. He looked up at me, continued for nearly 3 weeks. 3 weeks. The thought of enduring this for 16 more days made my stomach turn. How did you make it stop? I did not. It just ended. Your grandfather said I passed some kind of test. I was about to ask more when my telephone buzzed with a text from Marcus asking if I would be late. I grabbed my jacket and keys, promising Dad we would talk more later. The morning at Monroe General Store passed in a blur. I kept checking my telephone, half expecting Dr. Pierce to report some new strangeness. Around noon, I was restocking the tool section when I heard it. Ethan. The voice came from behind the power drill display. Ethan, help me. I dropped the hammer I was holding, the voice in broad daylight. I glanced around wildly, but the only other person in the aisle was Mrs. Patterson examining screwdrivers. Did you hear that? I asked her. She looked up, confused. Hear what, dear? The voice came again, this time from the back storage room. "Ethan, please." I backed away, bumping into a display of paint cans. Marcus appeared from behind the counter, frowning at me. "Everything acceptable?" I shook my head slightly, not wanting to frighten customers. "It is occurring during the day now." Understanding dawned on his face. He nodded toward the door. "Go see Constance. I will manage here." 20 minutes later, I sat in Constance Harper's cluttered living room, hands wrapped around a mug of tea I had not touched. I had just finished explaining everything. The voice, how it now followed me in daylight, how perfectly it mimicked my mother. Constance listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding as if confirming something she already knew. When I finished, she set down her own tea and leaned forward. "Blackwater is not like other places, Ethan. We sit on what my grandmother called threshold ground, a place where our world intersects with something else." "Something else?" I repeated. "I do not have a better name for it. No one does. But it has been here longer than the town, longer than any of us." She adjusted her glasses. "The rules exist because people noticed patterns, what attracted attention from the other side, and what kept us protected." I thought about Dr. Pierce's door, the fog, the unnatural shadows. Why is this occurring to me specifically? "Because you are a Monroe," she said simply. "On your mother's side, the Monroe family has served as guardians of Blackwater for generations. Your grandfather did it. Your father did it for a while. Now it is testing you. Testing me for what? To see if you will uphold the rules. To see if you will protect the town." She reached out and patted my hand. "The calling of your name will continue until you are accepted or until you break." I drove home with Constance's words echoing in my head. When I arrived, I contacted Dr. Pierce and asked him to meet me at the house. Dad was already home, and I filled them both in on what Constance had told me. "So what do we do?" Dr. Pierce asked. "Just wait it out?" I shook my head. "I do not think waiting is the answer. If this is a test, perhaps I need to prove something." Dad looked at me carefully. "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking we need to gather everyone, the whole town." I stood up, suddenly certain. If this is about protecting Blackwater, then we should make it official. The next day, Sheriff Martinez helped us spread the word. By 7 that evening, the community hall was packed with nearly every resident of Blackwater. People sat in folding chairs, stood along the walls, whispered to each other about why they had been summoned. I recognized faces from Monroe General Store, the restaurant, the pharmacy, people who had lived here all their lives alongside newcomers who had arrived in recent years. Dr. Pierce sat in the front row next to Dad. Constance was there as well, nodding encouragingly. Sheriff Martinez stood by the door, arms crossed. Marcus had closed the store early to attend. As I walked to the front of the room, the murmuring died down. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware of how quiet it had become. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "Most of you know me. I am Ethan Monroe. I work at Monroe General Store. My family has been in Blackwater for generations." I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. We all know Blackwater has rules. They may seem strange to outsiders or newcomers, but they keep us protected. Tonight I want to make these rules clear for everyone. As I spoke those words, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Several people pulled their jackets tighter, looking around in confusion. I continued anyway. Rule number 1, never enter the fog when it rolls in at night. The lights flickered briefly. On the wall behind me, shadows began to move in ways that did not match the people casting them. Rule number 2, if you encounter a child alone on the road after midnight, drive past without stopping. The cold intensified. I could see my breath now, forming clouds in front of my face. Dr. Pierce's eyes widened, but he gave me a small nod to continue. Rule number 3, if a stranger offers you something for free, decline politely and leave immediately. A pressure began building in the room. Not physical, but something I felt in my mind, pushing against my thoughts, trying to make me stop talking. Several people near the back stood up as if to depart, then sat back down looking confused. Rule number 4, if you hear knocking in sets of 3 after 2 a.m., do not answer your door. The shadows on the walls grew darker, stretching into impossible shapes. One formed what looked like a hand reaching toward me. I felt sweat breaking out on my forehead despite the cold. Rule number 5, I said, my voice growing stronger despite the pressure trying to silence me. If someone calls your name from dark places, never answer. As I said the final rule, I heard it. My name whispered from every corner of the room at once. "Ethan," came Mother Sarah's voice, though her tone had changed. It was angry now, threatening. The pressure in my head became almost unbearable. The shadows writhed on the walls. People gasped, some covering their ears as if they could hear it as well. But I did not stop. I looked out at my neighbors, my community, and continued. These rules are not superstitions. They are not small-town paranoia. They are our protection against something that has been here longer than Blackwater itself, something that tests us, that watches us. The voice grew louder, competing with my words. The shadows stretched toward me from all sides. My family has helped keep these rules alive for generations. The Monroes have been unofficial guardians of this knowledge. But these rules belong to all of us. They protect all of us, and we all need to follow them. The moment I finished speaking, I felt the supernatural pressure suddenly release. It was like a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. One moment I was straining against an invisible force, and the next I could breathe freely again. The voice that had been calling my name, the one that sounded so much like my mother Sarah, made a sound I will never forget. It was like wind rushing through shattered glass, high-pitched and jagged before fading away completely. The sound seemed to sweep through the community hall and then out into the night. I watched as the shadows that had been stretching toward me, twisting into impossible shapes on the walls, gradually settled back into normal patterns. The room temperature, which had dropped so dramatically that people were huddled in their jackets with visible breath, began to warm. I could feel the change spreading through the room as people straightened in their chairs and loosened their scarves. Constance Harper rose from her seat near the front. Her eyes met mine, and she gave me a firm nod before turning to address the crowd. "The test has passed," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the now quiet room. "What you have witnessed tonight is proof of what the Monroe family has protected us from for generations." As people began to file out, several of the older residents approached me. Mrs. Patterson, who must have been in her 90s, took my hand between both of hers. "Your mother would be proud," she told me. "Thank you for continuing the Monroe tradition." Mr. Garcia, who owned the pharmacy, clapped me on the shoulder. "Your mother's family has kept this town safe longer than any of us have been alive," he said. "Good to see you stepping up." I had not expected this reaction. I had been so focused on getting through my speech, on fighting against whatever was trying to stop me, that I had not considered what would come after. The acknowledgement felt both strange and right. Dad waited until most people had departed before approaching me. He did not say anything, just pulled me into a brief, tight embrace. When he stepped back, I could see moisture in his eyes. Dr. Pierce was the last to approach. He had stayed seated while others filed out, watching the interactions with a small smile. "That was something else," he said, standing to join me. "Are you acceptable?" "Yes," I said, surprised to find it was true. "Better than I have been in weeks, actually." We walked out of the community hall together. Outside, the night air felt different. I paused at the bottom of the steps, looking toward the edge of town where the marshland began. The marsh had seemed menacing for as long as I could remember, especially at night. There was always a sense that something was watching, waiting, but now the reeds stood quiet and still, no longer projecting that feeling of malice toward the town. "The marshland seems different," Dr. Pierce said, following my gaze. "You feel it as well?" I asked. "Less hostile," he said, searching for the right word, like whatever was there has retreated. Dad drove us home, and for the first time in weeks, I went to bed without dreading what I might hear in the darkness. No whispers came from the corners of my room. No voice called my name from outside my window. I slept deeply and dreamlessly until morning light filtered through my curtains. I spent the next several months working with Dr. Pierce and Constance to document Blackwater's 5 rules. What started as a simple project grew into something much more meaningful than I had expected. We established a routine. Monday and Wednesday evenings at Constance's house, surrounded by her collection of local artifacts and historical records, and Saturday afternoons interviewing town elders. Dr. Pierce brought a physicians' organization to our efforts. He created files for each rule, subcategorized by decades with cross-references to specific incidents. His home office disappeared under stacks of notes and recordings. These stories need to be preserved properly. He told me one evening as we walked back from interviewing Mrs. Patterson, who had shared a harrowing account of knocking in sets of 3 in 1985, not just for newcomers, but for the children born here who might take the rules for granted. The oldest residents opened up to us in ways that surprised me. Mr. Chen, at 97, the oldest person in town, invited us into his living room filled with black and white photos dating back to when Blackwater was just a cluster of buildings around a lumber mill. My father encountered the fog 9 times in his life. He told us, voice cracking with age but eyes sharp with memory, said it was always before something significant happened. Last time was 2 days before the mill explosion of 1952. Each interview revealed patterns I had never noticed growing up. The supernatural tests came in cycles, intensifying every few decades before subsiding again. The most recent uptick had started around the time I took over my full duties at Monroe General Store, culminating in my public recitation of the rules. Constance's contribution proved most surprising. On a cool autumn day, she led us to a series of rock formations in the hillside beyond the North Marshland, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound between ancient pine trees. The Monroe family were not the first guardians, she explained as we followed her surprisingly spry pace up the path. They were simply the ones who understood the importance of maintaining the knowledge. Inside the main formation, she shined her flashlight on a series of markings etched into the stone wall. The symbols looked nothing like English, yet contained distinct patterns that repeated in 5 separate groupings. These date back at least 600 years, Constance said. Made by people who lived here long before Blackwater existed. Dr. Pierce traced the symbols with his fingertips. They match our 5 rules almost exactly, Constance confirmed. The first grouping warns of mist that should not be entered. The second speaks of lone children who are not what they appear. The third describes gift givers with false intentions. The fourth mentions sounds in 3s that should not be answered. And the fifth, she paused, her flashlight illuminating the final set of symbols. The fifth warns never to answer when the voices call your name. I took photos of the markings to include in our documentation, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the formation's temperature. Whatever watched over Blackwater had been here long before any of us. The most personal discovery came when Dad brought down a box of Mother Sarah's belongings from our attic. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, we found 4 leather-bound journals spanning from 1985 until her death. I never knew she kept these, Dad said, handling them carefully. She was always private about her role as guardian. The journals detailed every supernatural occurrence Mother Sarah had witnessed or been told about. Fog sightings, mysterious knocking, voices calling from the marshland, shadows that moved against the light, all documented with dates, times, and outcomes. She had also recorded the names of those who broke the rules and what happened to them afterward. Most fascinating were her entries about my cousin Daniel. Mother had tried repeatedly to warn Daniel about the consequences of his actions, only to be dismissed as superstitious. The entry from the day after Daniel entered the fog was particularly heartbreaking. My nephew has challenged what should not be challenged. I fear for what comes next. Dr. Pierce and I grew closer through our work. The shared purpose brought us together in a way ordinary friendship never could have. We spent evenings reading Mother's journals aloud to each other, or comparing notes from our interviews. Sometimes we would stay up talking until dawn about what it all meant. The threshold ground, the ancient presence, our place in it all. One rainy Sunday in November, as we sorted through photos of the rock formation markings at my kitchen table, Dr. Pierce looked up at me. "I have been thinking," he said, adjusting his glasses the way he had that first day in Monroe General Store. "My rental agreement is up next month, and we are spending almost every evening together anyway." I felt a smile spread across my face. "Are you asking to share this house with me?" "Only if you are asking me to," he replied with a matching smile. 2 weeks later, we moved his things into my house. Dad helped carry boxes, commenting only once that my mother would have liked Dr. Pierce. Coming from him, it was the highest compliment possible. We settled into a comfortable routine. Mornings at Monroe General Store for me, clinic days for Dr. Pierce, evenings spent completing our documentation project. The supernatural incidents around town had quieted since my public recitation of the rules, but we knew from Mother's journals that such periods of calm were temporary. The town needs to be ready when the testing returns. I explained to Marcus one morning while restocking the hardware aisle, and newcomers need to understand these are not just small-town superstitions. Constance looked at me with something like reverence. "It means acceptance. The guardian of the threshold ground has acknowledged Ethan as Blackwater's protector." Word spread quickly through town. People stopped me on the street to ask about the fog, some offering congratulations as if I had achieved something remarkable. Mrs. Patterson brought a homemade pie to Monroe General Store. Sheriff Martinez nodded respectfully when our paths crossed outside the post office. Even Dad seemed to stand a little straighter, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The town council accepted our documentation project with unanimous approval. They allocated funds to print copies for the library, school, and town hall, ensuring the knowledge would be preserved and accessible. Mayor Wilson formally recognized Dr. Pierce and me as the keepers of Blackwater's traditions, a title that had never officially existed but everyone understood. On the first day the printed copies were available, I hung a framed version of the 5 rules on the wall near Monroe General Store's entrance, where newcomers would see them immediately upon entering. Marcus helped me position it just right, stepping back to admire our work. "Perfect spot," he said. "Your mother used to stand right there and recite them to every new face that walked in." I ran my fingers along the frame, feeling a connection to Mother Sarah and all the Monroes before her who had protected Blackwater. For the first time, I felt completely at peace with my role as guardian. The responsibility that had once seemed so burdensome now felt right, like a coat that finally fit properly. That evening, Dr. Pierce and I sat on our front porch watching fireflies appear in the gathering dusk. The marshland at the edge of town stood quiet and still, neither threatening nor inviting, simply present as it had been for centuries before Blackwater existed. "Do you ever wonder what it is?" Dr. Pierce asked, his head resting on my shoulder. "What lives in the threshold ground?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But Mother wrote that understanding it is not as important as respecting it." Dr. Pierce nodded thoughtfully. "I like being part of this, part of the tradition." I squeezed his hand, thinking of all the Monroes who had carried this responsibility before me, and now of Dr. Pierce sharing it with me. The legacy of protection continued, strengthened by our documentation and the town's renewed awareness of the rules. 3 months passed in peaceful routine. Dr. Pierce settled fully into his role at the clinic, earning the trust of even the most skeptical longtime residents. I continued managing Monroe General Store alongside Marcus, who had begun talking about retirement and hinting that perhaps it was time for me to consider taking over completely. Our documentation project was complete. Bound copies distributed throughout town, and several neighboring communities had even requested copies for their own records. Life in Blackwater felt normal, or as normal as it could be in a town built on threshold ground. The supernatural tests had quieted to the point where newcomers might think the rules were simply quaint local traditions, rather than necessary protections. But those of us who knew better remained vigilant. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late August when everything changed. I was helping Mrs. Garcia select paint colors for her kitchen renovation when Dr. Pierce burst through the store entrance, his face pale and his hands shaking. He did not wait for me to finish with my customer, instead walking directly to where I stood and gripping my arm. "Ethan," he said, his voice urgent but controlled, "we have a situation at the clinic. You need to come now." I glanced at Mrs. Garcia, who waved me away. "Go, dear. I can decide on paint another day." Marcus was already moving toward us, concern etched on his face. "What happened?" "There is a child," Dr. Pierce said, still holding my arm. "A little girl, maybe 7 years old. She walked into the clinic 20 minutes ago asking for help. Said she was lost." My stomach dropped. "During the day or after midnight?" "Mid-afternoon," Dr. Pierce confirmed. "But Ethan, she has no reflection. I noticed it when I walked past a window with her. I can see her standing there, but the glass shows nothing." Marcus and I exchanged looks. This was not in any of the documented patterns. The tests usually followed the rules precisely. A child on the road after midnight, yes, but a child with no reflection appearing during daylight at a medical clinic? This was something new. "Where is she now?" I asked. "In the waiting room," Dr. Pierce said. "My nurse is with her." I told them I needed to get something from my office and came straight here. Marcus nodded sagely. "Your mother would be proud. She always worried what would happen when she was gone." On a warm evening in early May, Dr. Pierce and I walked home from dinner at the restaurant. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across Main Street as we turned onto the residential road leading to our house. We were discussing plans to present our completed documentation to the town council when Dr. Pierce suddenly gripped my arm. "Ethan," he whispered, nodding toward the marshland ahead. There, at the edge of the marsh where our street met the wetlands, stood fog thicker than normal fog. Its edges gleamed with an inner light that seemed to pulse gently in the fading daylight. It formed a wall between us and the path forward, more solid than any fog had a right to be. Remembering Rule 1, we both froze in place. I could feel Dr. Pierce's hand tightening on my arm as the fog seemed to regard us with unnatural awareness. For several minutes, we stood motionless as the fog remained before us. Then, to my astonishment, it began withdrawing. In all the stories I had heard, in all of Mother's journals, the fog had never retreated for humans directly. The fog pulled back to the edges of the marshland, creating a clear path down our street. It remained there, flanking our route but no longer blocking it like a corridor carved through dangerous territory. I remained perfectly still as the fog held its position. The space it created lasted only seconds before the fog began moving again, but this time it retreated further, disappearing completely into the marshland. We watched in silence as it vanished among the reeds, its luminous quality visible through gaps in the cattails until it disappeared completely. "What just happened?" Dr. Pierce whispered, still not moving. "I do not know," I admitted. "But I think we need to tell Constance." The next day we recounted the experience to Constance in her living room. She listened intently, her eyes widening when I described the fog withdrawing. "In all the records I have studied, in all the stories passed down through generations," she said slowly, "there has never been an account of the fog creating a path for a person. It always blocks, tests, threatens, but never retreats." "What does it mean?" Dr. Pierce asked. The three of us left the store together, Marcus flipping the closed sign and locking the door behind us. If this was what I thought it was, we could not risk other people wandering into the situation unprepared. We drove to the clinic in my truck, none of us speaking. The weight of what we might be facing hung heavy in the cab. When we arrived, Dr. Pierce led us through the side entrance, avoiding the main waiting room. Through the small window in the door, I could see the child sitting in one of the plastic chairs, swinging her legs. She wore a faded yellow dress and scuffed white shoes. Her hair was pulled back in 2 braids tied with ribbons. She looked absolutely ordinary, like any child who might live in Blackwater. Except when I looked at the glass door leading outside, I could see the chairs reflected, the magazines on the table, even the nurse sitting nearby. But where the child sat, there was nothing. "Just empty space. Has anyone else noticed?" I asked quietly. The nurse commented that the girl was very quiet, Dr. Pierce said, "but I do not think she has looked at any reflective surfaces yet." Marcus moved closer to the window, studying the child carefully. "She's not moving right," he said after a moment. "Watch her breathing." I focused on the child's chest and realized Marcus was correct. She appeared to be breathing, her chest rising and falling, but the rhythm was wrong. Too steady, too mechanical, like someone mimicking breathing without understanding the natural variations. "We need to call Constance," I said. "This is beyond what we have documented." "I am already here," a voice said behind us. We all turned to find Constance Harper standing in the hallway, leaning on her cane. Sheriff Martinez called me when Dr. Pierce ran out of the clinic looking panicked. I came as quickly as I could. Constance moved to the window and looked at the child for a long moment. Her expression grew grave. "Oh," she breathed. "I had hoped I would never see this." "See what?" Dr. Pierce asked. "A replacement," Constance said, turning to face us. "Every few generations, the threshold ground tries to send something through. Not to test us, but to stay, to become part of our world." "What happens if it succeeds?" Marcus asked. Constance gripped her cane tighter. "It takes the place of someone real. Somewhere, there is likely a child who has gone missing. This thing will assume that child's life, her identity, her family, and no one will remember it was ever different." We all fell silent, the implications sinking in. I thought of families in surrounding towns, parents who might be searching for a lost daughter at this very moment. "How do we stop it?" I asked. "We have to make it leave voluntarily," Constance said. "If we forcibly remove it, it will simply try again with a different form. But if we can make it understand it is not welcome, that we see it for what it is, it should retreat." "Should?" Dr. Pierce repeated. Constance met his gaze. "This has only happened twice before in Blackwater's history. Once it worked. Once it did not. What happened when it did not work?" I asked, though part of me did not want to know. Constance's expression darkened. "The Johnsons lost their daughter. the real one. And the thing that replaced her lived among us for 60 years before finally fading away. Some of you knew her as old Mrs. Johnson who lived on Maple Street. I remembered old Mrs. Johnson. She had died when I was 16, an elderly woman who kept to herself and always seemed slightly off in ways no one could quite articulate. The thought that she had been a replacement, something from the threshold ground wearing human form, made my skin crawl. What do we do? I asked Constance. We confront it, she said. All of us together. We show it that we know what it is and we do not accept it here. We entered the waiting room together, the four of us presenting a united front. The nurse looked up in surprise as we filed in, but I gave her a small nod and she quietly excused herself, seeming to understand this was beyond normal medical situations. The child looked up at us with wide, innocent eyes. Hello, she said, her voice high and sweet. Are you here to help me find my mommy? Up close, the wrongness was more apparent. Her eyes did not quite focus correctly, tracking our movements a fraction of a second too slow. Her skin had a waxy quality that looked almost normal, but not quite. And when she smiled, I noticed her teeth were all exactly the same size. No variations like real human teeth would have. We know what you are, Constance said, gently but firmly. You do not belong here. The child's smile faltered. I am lost, she insisted. I need help. No, I said, stepping forward. You are not lost. You are trying to stay. But this is not your world. The child stood up, and as she did, her form flickered. For just a moment, I saw something else beneath the appearance of the little girl. Something tall and thin with too many joints. Then the child's form snapped back into place. I just want to stay, the child said, and now her voice had a pleading quality that sounded almost real. It is cold where I am, and lonely. Despite knowing what she was, I felt a pang of sympathy, but Constance placed a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. You have your place and we have ours, Constance said. The threshold ground is the boundary for a reason. You cannot cross it permanently. The child's expression shifted, cycling through emotions too quickly. Sadness, anger, fear, hope, each lasting only a second before morphing into the next. Please, she said, her voice now layered as if multiple voices were speaking at once. I can be good. I can be real. You can never be real, Marcus said firmly. Not here. You must go back. The child looked at each of us in turn, and I could see her form beginning to destabilize, the edges of her body blurred, flickering between the little girl and that other shape I had glimpsed. The temperature in the room dropped, and I could see our breath forming clouds. You see me? The child said, her voice now fully layered with multiple tones. You all see me. That has never happened before. Because we are guardians, I said. This is our purpose. To see, to know, and to protect. The child's form flickered more rapidly now. I could have been real, she whispered, sadness in all those layered voices. I could have lived, but not at the cost of someone else's life, Dr. Pierce said, speaking for the first time. Not by taking a real child's place. The child looked at Dr. Pierce for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. I understand, she said. I will go back. Her form began to fade, becoming translucent. As she disappeared, I saw her true shape more clearly. Tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. But there was something almost sad about it. Something lonely. Thank you for seeing me, the layered voices said as the last traces of her form vanished. Even if I cannot stay, thank you for seeing me. Then she was gone. The temperature in the room returned to normal. The oppressive feeling that had built during the confrontation lifted. We stood in the empty waiting room, all of us slightly shaken. Is it over? Dr. Pierce asked. For now, Constance said. But this is important. The threshold ground is changing, becoming more active. That child was just the first attempt. First? Marcus repeated. You think there will be more? Constance nodded gravely. The cycles are accelerating. The calm period after Ethan's acceptance was shorter than any I have seen. Something is shifting in the threshold ground. We need to warn the town, I said. If more attempts like this are coming, everyone needs to be prepared. Agreed, Constance said. But carefully. We cannot cause panic. Over the next week, we held a series of small meetings with different groups of residents. We explained what had happened at the clinic, how the tests were evolving beyond the established rules. We emphasized the importance of vigilance, of trusting instincts when something felt wrong, even if it did not match the documented patterns. The response was mixed. Longtime residents took it seriously, having lived through enough supernatural events to trust our warnings. Newer residents were more skeptical, though most agreed to be cautious. A few dismissed it entirely as mass hysteria or small-town superstition. Among those who dismissed it was the Richardson family, who had moved to Blackwater just 6 months earlier. James Richardson owned the new coffee shop on Main Street, and his wife Patricia taught at the elementary school. They had a teenage son named Michael who was 15 and struggling to adjust to small-town life after growing up in Seattle. I tried to speak with them personally, visiting their coffee shop one morning to explain the situation. James listened politely, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "Look, Ethan," he said as he wiped down the counter. "I appreciate that you believe all this, and I respect that it is part of your town's culture, but my family does not subscribe to supernatural beliefs. We will continue living our lives normally." "I understand," I said, "but please just be cautious. If anything unusual happens, anything at all that does not feel right, contact me immediately." "Sure," James said with a tight smile that told me he had no intention of doing so. 2 weeks later, Patricia Richardson called me in the middle of the night. Her voice was high and panicked, barely coherent through her sobbing. "Michael," she gasped, "our son. He came home wrong. I was at their house in under 10 minutes, Dad and Dr. Pierce with me. We found Patricia and James in their living room, both pale and shaking. Patricia was crying, and James, for all his earlier skepticism, looked terrified. He went to a party, James explained, his voice hollow. At the Wilsons' farm outside town. Came home around midnight. We were asleep, did not see him come in, but this morning when he came down for breakfast, he was different." "Different how?" Dr. Pierce asked. His eyes, Patricia sobbed. "They track us when we move, but they do not blink." And his voice sounds wrong, like he is imitating Michael but does not quite have it right. "Where is he now?" I asked. "His room," James said. "We told him to stay there until we could figure out what was wrong." He agreed, but he smiled when he said okay. Michael never smiles like that, wide and empty. "Stay here," I said. "Let me see him." I went upstairs alone, approaching Michael's room carefully. The door was closed and I could hear music playing inside. I knocked and the music stopped immediately. "Come in," Michael's voice said, but James was right. Something was off about the tone. I opened the door and found Michael sitting on his bed, hands folded in his lap, staring directly at me. He did not blink. His eyes were Michael's eyes, blue and bright, but they did not move naturally. They fixed on me with an intensity that was not quite human. "Hello, Ethan," Michael said. "My parents seem upset. Do you know why?" I stepped into the room, leaving the door open behind me. "Where did you go last night, Michael?" "The Wilsons' farm," he said. "There was a party. I went with friends." "What happened at the party?" "We talked, we laughed. We ate food. Normal party things." His delivery was too precise, too deliberate, like someone reciting a script. "Did you go anywhere else?" I asked. "Near the marshland, perhaps?" Michael's head tilted slightly, just a fraction too far to be natural. "Why would I go to the marshland?" "You tell me," I said, moving closer but staying near the door. "What happened to the real Michael?" The thing wearing Michael's face smiled, and it was the same empty smile Patricia had described. "I am Michael," it insisted. "Ask me anything. I know everything about Michael's life." "What is your mother's favorite flower?" I asked. Without hesitation, it answered, "Roses. Red roses." I felt a chill. That was correct. This thing had access to Michael's memories somehow. "What did your father say to you last Tuesday morning at breakfast?" I asked. The smile faltered. "He said, 'Have a good day,'" it answered, but there was uncertainty in its voice. "No," I said quietly. "He was not home for breakfast last Tuesday. He left for a supply run at 5 in the morning and did not return until evening." The thing's face went blank. Then it smiled again, but this time the smile was wrong, too wide, stretching Michael's face in ways that should not be possible. "Clever," it said, and now the voice was layered like the child's had been. "You see through me like you saw through her. Where is the real Michael?" I demanded. "Safe," it said. "Sleeping in the in-between place. He will wake when I am done here and he will not remember anything. It is painless. Bring him back," I said firmly. "Now." The thing laughed, and it was nothing like Michael's laugh. "Why would I do that? I am comfortable here. This body fits well. I like having hands and eyes that work in your world because I am not asking," I said. "I am telling you. Return him now or I will make you leave." "You cannot make me," it said, standing up. Michael's body moved fluidly, naturally. I am wearing him properly. There is no separation point you can exploit. I pulled out my phone and called Constance. She answered on the first ring, as if she had been expecting my call. It has taken Michael Richardson, I said, fully integrated. What do I do? Constance was quiet for a moment. The copper bell, she finally said. In my attic. Bring it to the house. Ring it 3 times while standing in the same room as the replacement. It will force a separation, but Ethan, it will be painful for the boy. I will risk painful over permanent, I said, and ended the call. I looked at the thing in Michael's body. You have 15 minutes, I said. Then I am coming back with something that will force you out. The thing's expression cycled through emotions rapidly, just like the child's had. Fear, anger, desperation. Please, it said in Michael's voice, now sounding young and scared. I do not want to go back there. It is empty there. Nothing but void and cold and endless waiting. Despite knowing what it was, I felt sympathy again. But I could not let that sympathy override my responsibility to the real Michael, to the Richardson family, to Blackwater itself. I am sorry, I said genuinely, but this is not your place. I left the room and went downstairs where I explained the situation to Patricia and James. Their reactions were different. Patricia collapsed into sobs of relief mixed with horror. James sat heavily on the couch, his skepticism shattered completely. I should have listened to you, he said numbly. God, I should have listened. You can make up for it now, I said. I need to get something from Constance Harper's house. Keep your distance from Michael's room until I return. If the thing comes out, do not engage with it. Come outside and wait for me. I drove to Constance's house at dangerous speeds, Dad and Dr. Pierce still with me. Constance was waiting on her porch with a small brass bell, tarnished with age and covered in symbols similar to those we had seen in the rock formations. This bell has been in my family for 9 generations, she said, handing it to me carefully. It was brought here by the first settlers who received it from the people who lived here before them. It calls to the threshold ground, commands separation between worlds. How does it work? Dr. Pierce asked. Ring it 3 times in the presence of the replacement, Constance said. The sound will force the false form to detach from whatever it has taken. But understand, the real person will experience the separation. It will hurt, perhaps even traumatize, but they will survive. I took the bell, feeling its weight in my hand. It was heavier than it looked, and warm to the touch despite the cool evening air. When we returned to the Richardson house, I found Patricia and James standing outside on the lawn. He came out, Patricia said, pointing to the house. He is just standing in the living room window watching us. I looked and saw Michael's form standing behind the glass, perfectly still, staring out at us with that too intense gaze. Stay here, I told them. If something goes wrong, if I do not come back out in 10 minutes, call Sheriff Martinez. I entered the house alone, the bell held carefully in both hands. The thing wearing Michael's body turned from the window to face me. You brought it, it said, looking at the bell. I can feel it from here. It burns. Last chance, I said. Leave voluntarily, it shook Michael's head. I want to stay. I want to be real. Then I am sorry, I said, and rang the bell. The sound it made was unlike any bell I had ever heard. It was clear and pure, but also deep, resonating not just in my ears, but in my chest, my bones, my teeth. The air itself seemed to vibrate with it. The thing screamed, and Michael's body convulsed. I rang the bell a second time, and the scream grew louder, more desperate. I could see the separation beginning, Michael's form becoming translucent as something else began to emerge from within. I rang the bell a third time, and the separation completed. Michael's body collapsed to the floor, gasping and shaking. Above him, for just a moment, I saw the thing's true form, that tall, impossibly thin shape with too many joints. It looked at me with what might have been sadness or hatred, I could not tell which. Then it dissolved like smoke, fading back to wherever it had come from. I dropped the bell and rushed to Michael, who was curled on the floor, trembling violently. His eyes were his own again, blinking normally, focused but terrified. What happened? He gasped. Where am I? I was at the party, and then there was fog, and then nothing, and now I am here and everything hurts. You are safe now, I told him, helping him sit up. Your parents are outside? You are going to be okay. Patricia and James rushed in when they saw movement through the window. Patricia dropped to her knees beside Michael, pulling him into her arms while James stood behind them, his hand on his son's shoulder. "Thank you," James said to me, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for not giving up on him." Over the next few days, Michael slowly recovered from the experience. He remembered going to the party, wandering outside because he felt too warm and seeing fog that seemed to call to him. He remembered walking toward it despite knowing Rule 1, then nothing until waking up on his living room floor in pain. Dr. Pierce examined him thoroughly and found no lasting physical damage, but recommended counseling for the psychological trauma. Michael had nightmares about being trapped in a dark, empty space where he could not move or speak, only watch as something else wore his body like a costume. The Richardson family's skepticism evaporated completely. James became one of the most vocal advocates for following the rules, sharing his son's story with other newcomers as a warning about the dangers of dismissing Blackwater's traditions. But the incident troubled me deeply. This was the second attempt at replacement in less than a month. Whatever was happening in the threshold ground was accelerating, becoming more aggressive. I called a meeting with Constance, Dad, Marcus, Dr. Pierce, and Sheriff Martinez at my house. We sat around my kitchen table late into the night discussing the implications. "The pattern is clear," Constance said, her aged hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "First the child in the clinic, now Michael. The threshold ground is not just testing anymore. It is trying to establish permanent presences in our world." "Why now?" Dr. Pierce asked. "What has changed?" Constance looked at me. Ethan's acceptance as guardian was supposed to establish balance. Usually, when the threshold ground acknowledges a protector, there is a period of calm. But instead, activity has increased. "Are you suggesting I caused this?" I asked, feeling a knot of guilt form in my stomach. "No," Dad said firmly. "Do not think that. This is not your fault." "Thomas is right," Constance agreed. "But I think your acceptance may have triggered something. By formally establishing a guardian, by publicly declaring the rules and gathering the town's awareness, we may have strengthened the boundary itself. And the things on the other side are pushing back against that strengthening. So what do? Sheriff Martinez asked. "We cannot have more incidents like Michael. If word spreads beyond Blackwater, we will have state investigators, maybe even federal attention. We need to reinforce the boundary," Constance said. "Actively, deliberately, not just maintain the rules, but strengthen the separation between worlds. How do we do that?" Marcus asked. Constance pulled a worn leather journal from her bag and opened it to a marked page. "My grandmother recorded a ritual," she said. "It was performed twice in Blackwater's history, both times during periods of increased threshold ground activity. It requires a guardian, a gathering of longtime residents, and an offering." "What kind of offering?" I asked warily. "Not a sacrifice," Constance assured me quickly. "An acknowledgement. We must give the threshold ground something it values, recognition of its existence and our respect for its power. In return, it must acknowledge our sovereignty over this side of the boundary." "When was this last performed?" Dr. Pierce asked. 96 years ago, Constance said. "During what the records call the breaking, a period when threshold ground activity became so intense that several residents died. The ritual ended the breaking and established the longest calm period in Blackwater's history." I looked around the table at the faces of people I trusted. They were all looking back at me, waiting for my decision as the acknowledged guardian. "When do we do this?" I asked Constance. "The autumn equinox," she said. 3 weeks from now. It must be performed at the transition point between seasons, when the boundary between times is thinnest." "Then we have 3 weeks to prepare," I said. "Tell me everything we need to do." Those 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Constance guided us through the ritual requirements. We needed 21 longtime residents, people whose families had been in Blackwater for at least 3 generations. We needed items representing the 5 rules. Wood from the marshland, a photograph of a child, something freely given and freely refused, a recording of knocking in sets of 3, and a mirror. We needed to cleanse the rock formation where the ancient symbols were carved, preparing it as the ritual site. And I, as guardian, needed to fast for 3 days before the equinox, purifying myself to serve as the conduit between our world and the threshold ground. Dr. Pierce worried about the fasting, insisting on monitoring my health throughout. "I appreciate your commitment," he said the night before the fast began, "but I do not want you making yourself ill." "I will be fine," I assured him. "Constance says every guardian who performed this ritual survived it. That is not as comforting as you think." Dr. Pierce replied, but he kissed my forehead and promised to support me. The 3 days of fasting were difficult. By the second day, I felt lightheaded and weak. By the third, I was seeing small hallucinations at the edges of my vision, shadows that moved when I looked directly at them. But Constance said this was normal, even necessary. The ritual required me to exist partially between worlds, and the fasting helped thin the veil between. On the evening of the autumn equinox, 21 longtime residents gathered at the rock formation. The oldest families in Blackwater were all represented. The sun was setting as we assembled, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Constance had drawn symbols on the ground around the rock formation, using ash mixed with water from the marshland. The 5 items representing the rules were arranged in a circle at the center. I stood in the middle of that circle, feeling dizzy from the fast but focused. The ritual began at the exact moment of the equinox, when day and night were perfectly balanced. Constance led the gathered residents in a chant, words in a language none of us fully understood but that had been passed down through generations. The words seemed to resonate with the symbols carved into the rock, making them glow with a faint light. I held the copper bell in one hand and a bundle of marsh grass in the other. As the chanting intensified, I began to speak the words Constance had taught me. They were an acknowledgement of the threshold ground's existence, its power, its right to exist, but also a firm statement of our boundaries, our right to this world, our sovereignty over this side of the separation. The air around us began to thicken, becoming almost gelatinous. I could see shapes forming in the periphery, tall and thin with too many joints watching us. The temperature dropped rapidly, and I could see everyone's breath forming clouds that hung in the air. I rang the bell 3 times, and with each ring, the shapes drew closer. But they did not threaten. They watched, listened, bore witness. I placed the bundle of marsh grass on the ground, offering it as a symbol of recognition. The grass burst into flames that burned green and cold, giving off no heat. The flames spread outward, following the lines of ash Constance had drawn, creating a circle of eerie green fire around us. Through that fire, I could see the threshold ground itself. Not as part of our world, but as its own place, vast and empty and eternal. The shapes I had glimpsed were only the smallest parts of something much larger, a presence that existed between realities. I speak for Blackwater, I said, my voice sounding strange and hollow. We acknowledge you. We respect you. We will maintain the rules that honor the boundary between our worlds, but you must acknowledge us. You must respect our sovereignty. You must cease trying to cross permanently into our realm. The presence did not speak in words. Instead, I felt its response directly in my mind. A sensation of agreement, but also of hunger, of loneliness. The threshold ground existed between worlds, belonging fully to neither. It wanted connection, presence, reality, but it understood as we understood that boundaries existed for reasons. I felt the agreement settle, like a contract signed in something deeper than words. The green flames extinguished all at once. The shapes faded back into invisibility. The air returned to normal consistency. I collapsed. The 3 days of fasting and the intensity of the ritual overwhelming me. Dr. Pierce caught me before I hit the ground, lowering me gently while checking my pulse. He is acceptable, Constance said, kneeling beside us. The ritual was successful. The boundary is reinforced. I lay there looking up at the darkening sky, feeling simultaneously exhausted and at peace. The pressure that had been building over the past months, the sense of something pushing against our world, had eased. The threshold ground had acknowledged our sovereignty, and we had acknowledged its existence. Balance was restored. Over the following weeks, the change in Blackwater was noticeable. The supernatural incidents did not stop completely. They never would, but they returned to the expected patterns. The fog appeared occasionally, but only at night and only as a test of whether people would remember Rule 1. Children were not seen alone on roads. The shadows moved as shadows should. Michael Richardson recovered fully from his ordeal, though he never went near the marshland again. The Richardson family became deeply involved in maintaining Blackwater's traditions, with Patricia even helping to teach the rules to elementary school students. Dr. Pierce and I settled into our life together, our shared purpose as keepers of Blackwater's knowledge strengthening our bond. We continued documenting incidents, updating our records with new information, ensuring future generations would have the knowledge they needed. Marcus finally retired from Monroe General Store, and I took over as manager. He still stopped by regularly, offering advice and sharing stories about the old days. The store became not just a place of business, but a gathering spot where people could ask questions about the rules, share experiences, and feel connected to the town's protective traditions. Sheriff Martinez worked with us to create a formal protocol for handling supernatural incidents. New deputies received training on the 5 rules during orientation. Emergency responders knew to contact me or Constance if they encountered anything unusual. The town council established an annual Remembrance Day on the autumn equinox, where residents gathered to reaffirm their commitment to the rules and honor those who had protected Blackwater through the generations. It became a celebration of our unique heritage, a reminder that we were part of something larger than ourselves. One year after the ritual, on a cool autumn evening, Dr. Pierce and I sat on our porch watching the sunset. The marshland at the edge of town was quiet, the reeds swaying gently in the breeze. Everything felt peaceful, balanced, right. "Do you ever regret it?" Dr. Pierce asked, his head resting on my shoulder. "Taking on this responsibility?" I thought about it carefully. "Never," I said. "This is who I am meant to be. This is what the Monroe family has always done." Dr. Pierce squeezed my hand. "I am glad I came to Blackwater," he said. "I am glad I met you. Even with all the strangeness?" I asked with a smile. "Especially with all the strangeness," he replied. "This is real. This matters. Most people live their whole lives never finding something that matters this much." We sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. Somewhere in the distance, I heard an owl calling. Normal night sounds in a town that was anything but normal. The copper bell sat on a shelf inside, cleaned and ready if we ever needed it again. The framed rules hung in Monroe General Store, welcoming newcomers and reminding longtime residents. Our documentation was preserved in the library, the school, and the town hall. Constance visited often, sharing new insights from her research and teaching me the deeper mysteries of the threshold ground. Dad seemed more relaxed than he had in years. The burden of guardianship finally lifted from his shoulders and placed on mine where it belonged. I thought about Mother Sarah often, wondering if she could see what I had become. I hoped she would be proud. I hoped she knew that her legacy continued, that the Monroe tradition of protection remained strong. Sometimes, late at night, I would walk to the edge of the marshland and stand there in the darkness, not testing the rules, but acknowledging the presence beyond. A silent conversation between guardian and threshold ground, between protector and protected. The fog never approached me anymore. The shadows remained still, the voices were silent. I had been accepted, acknowledged, recognized as the guardian of Blackwater, and in return, I honored my responsibility to protect this town and its people from the dangers that existed in the spaces between worlds. Life continued in its strange, peaceful rhythm. Newcomers arrived and learned the rules. Children grew up knowing to avoid the fog, to drive past lone figures on dark roads, to refuse suspicious offers. The patterns held, the balance remained. Dr. Pierce's medical practice thrived as he became a trusted member of the community. His initial curiosity about Blackwater's peculiarities had transformed into genuine dedication to protecting its residents, both from natural ailments and supernatural threats. We talked sometimes about the future, about what would happen when we grew old, about who would take on the guardian role after me. The Monroe line would continue one way or another. Perhaps we would adopt, raising a child in the traditions. Perhaps a cousin would emerge, drawn to Blackwater by the same pull that had guided generations before. The threshold ground would choose its next protector when the time came. For now, I was content to serve, to watch, to protect. Every morning I opened Monroe General Store, greeting familiar faces and new arrivals alike. Every evening I returned home to Dr. Pierce, to our quiet life on the edge of something vast and unknowable. The 5 rules remained constant, written on the wall of the store, taught in the schools, passed from parent to child. They were our shield, our wisdom, our survival. Never enter the fog when it rolls in at night. If you encounter a child alone on the road after midnight, drive past without stopping. If a stranger offers you something for free, Decline politely and leave immediately. If you hear knocking in sets of 3 after 2 a.m., do not answer your door. If someone calls your name from dark places, never answer. Simple rules, ancient wisdom, the difference between safety and disaster. Blackwater remained a threshold place, a boundary between worlds. The supernatural tests would continue, the rules would need to be followed, and vigilance would always be necessary. But the balance was maintained, respected on both sides of the boundary. And I, Ethan Monroe, 24 years old and guardian of Blackwater, would ensure it stayed that way. For my generation and for all the generations to come. The Monroe legacy of protection continued, strengthened by knowledge, community, and the understanding that some boundaries exist for the safety of all. On quiet nights, when the wind whispered through the reeds and the marshland lay still under starlight, I felt the weight of my responsibility not as a burden, but as a privilege. I was part of something ancient and important, a living link in a chain that stretched back centuries and would continue long after I was gone. Dr. Pierce stood beside me in all things, my partner in both life and guardianship. Together we maintained the knowledge, updated the documentation, and ensured that Blackwater's protections remained strong. The threshold ground watched, as it always had, as it always would. But it no longer pushed against our boundaries. It no longer sent replacements or tests beyond the established patterns. The ritual had held. The agreement remained in force. Sometimes I wondered about the lonely presence that existed in the spaces between worlds, trapped in neither here nor there, watching our reality with hunger and loneliness. I felt compassion for it, even as I maintained my vigilance against it. We were not enemies exactly. We were simply beings on opposite sides of a necessary boundary, each protecting our own realm. The years ahead would bring new challenges, new residents who needed to learn the rules, perhaps new tests as the cycles turned. But I was ready. The Monroe family had always been ready, generation after generation, standing guard over Blackwater and keeping its people safe. As I stood on my porch that autumn evening, Dr. Pierce's hand warm in mine, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was my home. These were my people. This was my purpose. And I would protect them all, for as long as the threshold ground needed a guardian, for as long as Blackwater needed a Monroe to stand watch. The fog rolled in across the marshland as night deepened, but it stayed where it belonged, on the far side of the boundary. The rules held, the balance remained. And in a small town in Montana, where the real world brushed against something else, life continued under the protection of 5 simple rules and 1 dedicated guardian.